Dr. Manisha now to tell us how to manage intermediate uveitis. Dr. Manisha was my senior during fellowship at Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai, where she did her Vitreoretina fellowship from. She is head of Vitreoretina and Clinical Research Department at Dr. Shroff Charity Eye Hospital, New Delhi. She is secretary of the Uveitis Society of India and also joint secretary of the Vitreoretina Society of India. She has more than 100 peer-reviewed publications and special interest in ocular tuberculosis. May I invite Dr. Manisha to please share her screen.
At the outset, thank you, Dr. Chekitan, for making me a part of this interesting IC at the fag end of the day. And a good evening to everyone. So in the coming few minutes, I would be speaking on the intricacies of diagnosing and treating intermediate uveitis. So as we all know that basically, if we see the anatomical classification, it is classified into anterior, intermediate, posterior, and panuveitis. Intermediate uveitis, basically, it is described as inflammation of the anterior vitreous, ciliary body, and peripheral retina with minimal or no anterior segment sign or retinochoroidal sign. It may or may not be associated with any underlying infection or systemic disease. However, pars planitis is basically a subset of intermediate uveitis when there is no underlying disease, when there is snowball formation in the absence of any infection or systemic disease, and therefore, primarily it is idiopathic. If you see the IUSG group, they have actually said that the primary site of inflammation in intermediate uveitis is primarily the vitreous. Now, intermediate uveitis, it's not hereditary, though it is found to run in families, and primarily T-cell mediated is the response found in intermediate uveitis. The second most important cell being the macrophages. Active inflammation, we may see giant cells and epithelioid cells rarely. There may sometimes be an HLA association, which may be found in a few of the patients. And lymphocytic infiltration of the venules gives us a clinical picture of vasculitis, which is again very often seen in the peripheral retina. Now, what are the problems faced in diagnosing intermediate uveitis? It is most underdiagnosed uveitic entity, and this could be primarily because of a lack of awareness, a lack of training to examine the pars plana area, which requires a scleral indentation, the lack of patient cooperation, especially when we are dealing with children who are suffering from pars planitis. They often will be very uncooperative for the examination of the retinal periphery. So diagnosis is primarily a clinical diagnosis, and we must focus on the following. One is the duration of symptoms, what have been the number of recurrences in the past, and finding associations with any underlying systemic disease. The symptoms mainly are floaters, blurring of vision, photophobia, and very uncommonly, we may find pain and redness. There's a whole gamut of signs which may be present right from the conjunctiva showing a mild congestion to a AC reaction with some amount of vitreous cells and flare, which is mostly confined to the inferior area. There may be snowballs which are floating in the inferior vitreous cavity close to the retina, but what is important is that they will not be touching the retina. There can be snowbank, which is more often found in chronic pars planitis cases, which are basically extensive exudates covering the pars plana area. We can have an evidence of periphlebitis. Cystoid macular edema, again, is a very important sign. And I remember my teachers teaching me that if you see any young patient with an unexplained cystoid macular edema, always look for pars planitis and do a good scleral indentation. There can be some element of tortuosity of the retinal vessels. And if the patient has been very chronic and very poorly treated, then the disease can progress to neovascularization with formation of peripheral tractional detachment. So this basically shows vitreous floaters, the snowball opacities, cystoid macular edema, and snow banking, which are very classical signs of pars planitis. If we do a fundus fluorescein angiography, we can pick up neovascularization. We can sometimes also pick up peripheral CNP areas and vasculitis. And OCT very classically picks up the cystoid macular edema in cases of intermediate uveitis. The B scan sometimes can be useful, which can show a lot of vitreous debris when we have a non-dilating pupil. And a UBM can show a cyclitic membrane and show the status of ciliary body, which actually may be resulting in a hypotony in these patients. Now, there are a whole gamut of investigations which can be performed for intermediate uveitis, right from the test for tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, syphilis, multiple sclerosis, any history of rash or arthritis, and also unilateral inflammation where the serological tests for Toxocara are recommended. Coming to differential diagnosis, I think the most important and underdiagnosed entity is the Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis, because the patient actually has all the signs which are resembling a pars planitis. But the problem is that the Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis does not require a treatment with steroids. And often we find the patients presenting to our clinic who have been over-treated with steroids with all kinds of complications happening in the way of diabetes and secondary glaucoma. You can also have patients of endogenous endophthalmitis and posterior uveitis presenting with vitreous opacity. Perivasculitis, you can have a differential such as Eales disease, sarcoid, and Behçet's disease. Coming to complications of intermediate uveitis, we can have cystoid macular edema. As I mentioned, it's a very common sign which is found, and it is found in approximately 50% of the patients, resulting in visual loss and secondary ERM formation. We can also have a cataract formation, and most commonly found is the posterior subcapsular cataract. We can have glaucoma secondary to the steroid, which is very much recommended for treatment in these patients. Then some patients can also develop optic disc edema, and neovascularization can happen secondary to a chronic inflammation. We can also have a retinal detachment, both rhegmatogenous and tractional detachment, as a complication of long-standing pars planitis. Coming to the treatment, we can have the medical treatment in the form of corticosteroids, which do remain the mainstay of treatment. If it is a systemic for bilateral involvement or a unilateral not improving with periocular steroids, then we have to opt for oral steroids. While we have various options available, such as a posterior subtenon tricot injection, an IVTA, and the safest being the Ozurdex, which is very much used these days. And if you have a patient which is in a very severe state, then even IVMP can be given, but it is very rarely required. If the patient is has been on a very chronic treatment with steroids with a poor response, we can also resort to immunosuppressive agents. And the most commonly used are the azathioprine, methotrexate, mycophenolate, mefetil is useful for treating chronic CME, though the expense is a little higher for the patient. We can also resort to using T-cell inhibitors, and biological response modifiers also can be used, like infliximab, as JB sir just mentioned. But the administration very much has to be co-managed by a rheumatologist. So topical steroids and cycloplegics, they often are required in these patients because very often these patients will have a spillover anterior uveitis. Very rarely a surgical intervention may be required, such as a cryopexy to ablate the capillary non-perfusion areas and to treat the neovascularization in the peripheral retina. Laser photocoagulation again has the same role to play. We can give anti-VEGF injections to counter the neovascularization inside the eye. And vitrectomy is something which is reserved for tractional retinal detachment or for a rhegmatogenous detachment. Now, problems in the management of these patients basically are these are young patients who have very relapsing and a remitting nature of inflammation, leading to very chronic situation and with significant complications. The corticosteroids are the first line of treatment, but in a country like India, which is endemic for tuberculosis, steroids can only be given only after we are very sure that there is no evidence of underlying tuberculosis. Improper treatment or an early taper of the drugs are often responsible for recurrences in these patients. And often these patients are young on long-term steroids with all associated complications like diabetes and secondary glaucoma. So there is absolutely no consensus right now regarding the endpoint of treatment in such patients. So it still is a question in our minds when to stop treating these patients. So I would just end my talk by saying that a timely diagnosis and treatment is required for these young patients. A timely management of all the associated complications is mandatory, and a very regular follow-up is required because they always have a recurrence of this disease in a long-term follow-up.